Hi, everyone, and welcome to our July Ambassador Briefing. I appreciate everyone taking time today to be with us. And so first, for the presenters will be my colleague, Mike Lee, who will speak about the recent Supreme Court Chevron decision and how that could affect the kidney community. Then after Mike speaks, to my colleagues, Lauren Andracchio and Saiki will speak about our brand new transplant toolkit, which I will say looks awesome, and I'm excited to be able to share it with you all. So without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Mike. You're muted, Mike.
Sorry, thanks, Ben. How's my audio? Does it sound okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Can I share some slides?
You should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, I have you listed as co-presenter, so you should be able to, or co-host, so you should be able to share.
Okay.
Here we go.
Sorry. Okay. The slide one. Okay. So I'm just gonna run down a recent Supreme Court decision um, on uh, Chevron deference. Uh, and what that means for health policy. So I'll just get right into it. So, what is Chevron deference? So, it's a legal framework, or what they call a doctrine, that came about from a 1984 U.S. Supreme Court decision, and that case was called Chevron versus Natural Resource Defense Council, hence why we all refer to it as Chevron. And through that opinion, the court set up this framework where federal courts kind of take this two-step analysis when they are examining a challenge to a federal regulation. So, kind of step one is to determine if Congress directly addressed the precise question at issue with clear meaning in the statute, in the law. And then step two, if the meaning is unclear, then the court determines if the agency's interpretation is reasonable. So, for over 40 years, this Chevron deference doctrine has required courts to defer to a reasonable agency decision where a federal law is silent or unclear. So, on June 28th, the Supreme Court issued a decision that overturns the Chevron deference doctrine. It was a 6-3 decision along ideological lines. Um, and it was it was two cases that were decided jointly um, that you might hear referred to. So the first case was Loper Bright versus Raimondo, and then the second one was Relentless versus Department of Commerce. People typically just say Loper Bright when they're referring to this case that overturned Chevron. So uh, just real quick, the case was about fisheries, fishing boats having to be required to have like observers on board and have to pay for those observers, and so that was kind of the quick crux of the case. So, um, in his opinion for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said that the Chevron deference was inconsistent with the Administrative Procedure Act, which is a 1945 federal law that lays out the procedures for federal agencies in issuing rules and for courts to review them. And Judge Roberts said that um, the APA directs the courts to decide legal questions by applying their own judgment. Um, and therefore, this is a quote from the opinion, makes clear that agency interpretations of statutes, like agency interpretations of the Constitution, are not entitled to deference under the APA. Under the APA, it thus remains the responsibility of the court to decide whether the law remains what the agency says. So basically, his opinion said courts should decide statutory questions, not agencies. And also of note, his opinion indicated that this decision does not require cases that were decided based on Chevron to be retried or overturned. So anything that was decided previously under Chevron is still the case. So, in her dissenting opinion, Justice Kagan um, uh, said that the APA does not include references to how courts should review agency regulations, and she, kind of the heart of the matter, the differences of opinion is on the majority side. They determined that courts really should be the arbiters of interpreting statutes. Um, on the dissenting side, um, their argument is that Congress writes laws in a way that delegates authority to federal agencies to issue regulations to implement those laws, and a lot of times they are kind of flexible or open to interpretation because the issues that they're dealing with are complex, and federal agencies have scientific experts, technical experts who have the expertise to issue regulations that implement laws that are passed by Congress. So, but that's kind of the crux. If I were to kind of describe in a couple of lines, that's kind of the issue at play here, with one side saying Chevron should be overturned, and once the other side saying Chevron should be upheld. So, in her dissent, Justice Kagan said, this is a direct quote: "In one fell swoop, the majority today gives itself exclusive power over every open issue, no matter how expertise-driven or policy-laden, involving the meaning of regulatory law. As if it did not have enough on its plate, the majority turns itself into the country's administrative czar." Which is obviously very strong language. And she read her dissent from the bench, which also indicates a strong disagreement of the majority's opinion. So, what does this all mean potentially on regulations? Let me just preface this by saying, we don't know what's going to happen. This is a big decision that will play out over years, but legal experts, policy experts, just kind of speculating what could happen now that Chevron deference is overturned, point to these things here on this slide. So it shifts power to lower courts in interpreting agencies' regulations and their interpretation of a law. So it shifts the policy decisions. Policy decisions could shift from agency technical experts to federal judges, especially federal judges at the lower level courts. Over the years since Chevron came into play in 1984, lower level courts have really relied on that to defer to agencies in interpreting and implementing regulations. So now that shift is now towards the lower courts to kind of to decide to interpret those interpretations. There could be more of an incentive for companies, organizations to challenge regulations in a court now that courts don't have to defer to agency decisions and expertise when statutes are unclear or silent. You could see more regulations being overturned, which could place a real barrier on implementing key healthcare protections, such as prescription drug affordability in Medicare, eligibility rules for Medicaid beneficiaries, infectious disease control and public safety standards, as well as consumer protections for those in self-insured private employer plans. On the agency side, you could see federal agencies being more cautious in writing the regulations, especially when they're acting under laws that are ambiguous. They could spend when regulators, issue proposed rules, final rules. They spend a lot of time explaining why they have the authority to issue a particular regulation. With this Supreme Court decision, they could be spending more time kind of directly pointing to a statute and quoting the statute. And then of note, I just want to note that Congress, a lot of times when they write bills, they will delegate certain authorities to the federal agency to implement the, the law. So, a reason for that is, these issues are complex, and again, agencies have the technical expertise to implement them. So, Congress still has that ability, but with this overturning of Chevron, regulations going forward can still be reviewed by courts, and now there's not this deference that the lower courts would previously had to implement, to be required to follow. So you just could see more challenges to the administrative rules. And then what's the potential impact on the legislative process? Again, like I just said, Congress has typically delegated policy details to agencies when they write these laws. Another reason for that is just to get agreement on something that might be contentious. Leaving it kind of broad or ambiguous allows lawmakers to kind of get it done and get legislation over the finish line. So now that Chevron has been overturned, Congress will need to be more specific in the legislative language to be clearer on its intent, to be clearer on policy specifics. The flip side is that congressional offices right now don't really have a wealth of policy expertise to be more specific in their laws, which is another reason why laws written now, statutes are written more broadly and leaving it to the agencies to implement them. In terms of advocacy and lobbying, you could see greater engagement with Congress on specific details to fill in gaps in policy expertise. Bills could be longer and more complex to accommodate more specifics and in-depth policy. And also, we could see more partisan gridlock, again, because lawmakers can't come to terms on contentious issues and needing to be more specific on legislative language. So there's just kind of so progress in legislation could be even more than it already is. And then this is just kind of a list of health issues that could be impacted by this Chevron decision. Artificial intelligence is a very hot topic on Capitol Hill, especially in healthcare. Lawmakers are, I think there's a task force on the Hill of senators and representatives to come together to come up with a law on AI, the use of AI. This could, stymie those efforts. Also, a lot of times with issues involving emerging technologies, administrations will kind of use existing laws on the books to kind of put out regulations in the short term, while Congress is working on legislation on that emerging technology. With this Chevron decision, that could impede the ability of an administration to regulate AI based on current statute. And then Affordable Care Act regulations, Medicare payment regulations, you could see possible challenges to those rules that come out. You could see possibly newfound challenges to FDA's authority on drug approvals. Could also see challenges on drug pricing. As I'm sure many of you know, the Inflation Reduction Act that allows the government to negotiate drug prices directly with manufacturers, and we could see challenges to those to those rules. And then there already is ongoing litigation about the surprise billing regulations, which that is the No Surprises Act, which was a law passed a few years ago that protects consumers from surprise medical bills. And there has been ongoing back and forth between providers and insurers about who has to pick up the tab when on those billing issues, and there's been ongoing litigation. And so, with this Chevron difference overturning, you can see it affecting that continuing litigation. So that is my overview of Chevron. I know it's kind of, I am not a lawyer. Also, I should have prefaced that. So, but that's kind of from a policy perspective, what the Supreme Court's decision could mean for health policy. So happy to take any questions.
So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can just chime in now. Or if there's no questions now, then if they pop up later for you, I'm happy to address them then. All right, so thank you, Mike, for speaking with us. Oh, we got one here in the chat. How do you envision the impact of stronger environmental regulations on the quality of life for communities, especially those most vulnerable to environmental and health issues?
I'm guessing the person is referring to how the Chevron overturning could impact environmental regulations.
Yeah.
Well, so you could see it could really hamper the ability of the EPA and federal agencies to implement environmental regulations, because you could see, you already see challenges from industry, corporations challenging environmental regulations, and now that Chevron is overturned, lower courts don't have to defer to an agency's interpretation of the law. That could be a win for the the entities that are challenging stricter environmental regulations. So,
thank you.
Yep.
All right, so now I will turn it over to Lauren and Amma to talk about our awesome new transplant toolkit. So, Lauren, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for hyping it up. Now I have to show that it's really as great as you mentioned. First of all, I just wanted to say it's great to see so many familiar faces, familiar names. I've worked with a variety of you in different capacities, whether it was at Kidney Action Week or for focus groups, or I've met you at various events. So great to see some familiar faces. Also great to see some new faces for me. And for those new faces, I'll just say my name is Lauren Andracchio. I am an Associate Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships. And before I go on, I just wanted Amma to have a chance to wave as well. Amma Seichi, she is working on the same team. She's a colleague, and she will be providing some resources in the chat as we go through our PowerPoint today. So let's see. So I mentioned we're on the Outreach and Strategic Partnerships team. What do we do? So I mentioned also Kidney Action Week. Our team is largely, our primary responsibilities are around Kidney Action Week. So putting on this annual virtual educational event that occurs in March, but also we work with our AKF's Health Equity Coalition around various activities. And what is this Health Equity Coalition? Well, in 2021, AKF formed the Health Equity Coalition, which is an primarily organization-based alliance that is composed of members who have an expertise in one of the 4 areas that we focus on for health equity. Those 4 areas are access to transplant, home dialysis utilization, prevention and awareness, and diversity in clinical trials. So we work with these members to find some actions that AKF can take alongside them that can reduce some of these health disparities. And the Health Equity Coalition is particularly relevant to our conversation today. I'm here to share this new resource, Your Guide to Kidney Transplant, with you all. And this really came from our Health Equity Coalition. So we meet with them regularly. And in our first year of working with the Health Equity Coalition, we brainstormed health disparities as it relates to kidney disease, particularly focusing on these 4 areas. But also, what are some ways that we can work to reduce these health disparities? And in these conversations, and I'm going to focus on access to transplant today, because that's the resource I'm sharing about, what came up that was particularly insightful, and these different experts were saying, transplant is this large, confusing process for many. There's many steps to it. It differs for transplant centers. And the materials that we have right now have a lot of medical jargon in it, and it's not written for everyone. And so they were saying what's missing are materials, educational materials that break down transplant, everything leading up to transplant for people or loved ones or potential donors, so they can understand the process fully before they go into it. And so they can be empowered to have conversations with their healthcare providers. So that was the intention of this Your Guide to Kidney Transplant. So now I'm going to share my slides now that I did that background, and just bear with me while I get this up. Let's see. We have that. And let's go to presenter mode. Okay. So this is our Your Guide to Kidney Transplant, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm going to refer to it as our Transplant Toolkit. That's what we referred to it for the year leading up to it, but we call it now our Your Guide to Kidney Transplant. And what is it? It is a printer-friendly and downloadable resource. And one thing that I will note is it is patient-centered. And that was another thing that was really important in these conversations with our Health Equity Coalition, is that it is patient-centered, because these are the people that are going through it. So how do we do this? We did this by having conversations, having some focus groups prior to building out anything that looked like this, and to understand for people that are living with going through this process, what it was like for them. So we met with people that were on the wait list. We met with people that had been through transplant. We also met with people that were donors to understand their experience, to listen to their challenges, to listen to potential things that they wish they had known when they went through this, or as they go through this, as well as resources that they thought would be helpful to people that do go through that. We also met with some renal professionals that are in the transplant space, so transplant surgeons, transplant nephrologists, nurse practitioners, social workers, to understand from their perspective. And that's really how we built out this resource. So let me go to the next slide to show you what it looks like. And I apologize if the print is small here. I'll read along as we go through. But on the left is our table of contents. So this ended up being, we had these conversations. We also worked with consultants that had the lived experience perspective as well as the professional experience to build out some of these resources. And it became pretty big, thinking about everything that we wanted to put into this resource that walked patients and loved ones through everything they need to know prior to transplant. So kidney transplant overview. What is a transplant? What are the different transplant options? What are the risks versus benefits? A kidney transplant roadmap. So as I mentioned, it is an overwhelming process. And one thing that is clear and oftentimes the case, it's not always linear. The process isn't always linear for everyone. And there are, different transplant centers operate differently. So we have a roadmap, which I'll show you in a minute. The transplant center. So what is the transplant center, who they would be partnering with at the transplant center and their roles, eligibility requirements, what are different factors that are considered as you are evaluated to be a transplant candidate. And then, as I mentioned, we also talked to loved ones and to donors. So we wanted resources for people who are considering being a caregiver. What are some expectations? And for those that are looking for a donor, we wanted resources, as well as people that were considering becoming a donor. And then at the end, there are some other more, interactive resources. We wanted to break it up so it wasn't just written text. So we have myths versus facts and questions and quizzes. On the right, the reason I called out, or not the reason I called out, I'll just point out on this slide, in the top right, we have these tabs throughout because it did become such a large resource and we wanted it to be easy. So if you are considering being a living donor. We wanted you to be able to easily page through this resource to find the living donor section. So we have these tabs throughout. And then this is the roadmap I referred to. So we worked with a variety of individuals to figure out how to map this out. We know that there's many steps to the transplant process. And as I mentioned, it's not always linear. So what we designed here and the expectations we set are kind of the best practices at transplant centers. And we make it clear that every transplant center is different. So if what you hear from your transplant center may not be lining up here, feel free to reach out to them and figure out what the right expectation is for you. So you'll see on the left, there's all of these different steps. Start talking to your doctor, get a referral. And the pages that following, we outline a little bit more details about, different expectations, different tips as they go through those steps. So there are more details throughout. Who's on the transplant team? So the various different transplant care team members, and we also include more information about what their role is, when you would be talking to them, who is the right person to ask this particular question. And then on the right, I just want to show that we have these tips. So we have some tips throughout. We have some what we call did you knows, so fun facts throughout. So it's not just, again, reading through the text. And then lastly, the last few images I'll show of the toolkit are myths versus facts. So one thing that came out, one of our really most common learning that we learned from the focus group and from the interviews with renal professionals was one of the things that they kept saying is transplant is not a cure. Transplant is a treatment option. And so that's, one of the myths that we call out. We have a few others in here, but it's just another way to learn some of this information. And then to my point in the beginning about trying to create information that was empowering, having these conversations with your transplant team or your nephrologist in the beginning can be hard, knowing where to start. So we wanted to give some questions to empower individuals that are considering going through transplant, what questions to ask to start these conversations. So now that this resource is created, and if you haven't already, feel free to put the link in the chat to the digital copy of the toolkit, please. So now that we have it created, we have a pretty, robust distribution plan. And I'm not going to go through every bullet point here, but what I will mention is we're getting this out on social media. We're getting this out to renal professionals as well through our listservs and also through different conferences that we're attending. We have it on our Kidney Health for All website, which I'll talk about in a minute, but we're also printing this and we're mailing this out to AKF's financial assistance recipients. But I also wanted to note we have some printed, and because you all are AKF ambassadors, if anyone is interested in a printed copy, we would be happy to mail a copy to you. And is also going to put a form in the chat. So if you would like a copy, please feel free to complete that form. Okay, and what's up next? So it's great that we have this resource. We know this isn't the end, though. So not everyone takes in information by, reading it front to back, and we don't expect anyone to, but we do want to break up this information in different ways. And a couple of the ways that we're thinking about now is designing a phone app that can offer this information in a more interactive setting. So that can walk through the transplant process and offer tips and suggestions along the way, potentially role play videos. And then our next topic that we're going to be working on is post-transplant living. So, what we have created so far is for individuals prior to transplant. We know there's a lot of changes that happen after transplant, and we want to provide some sort of guidance and support for people that have been through it, because we know there's a lot of changes to their day-to-day living and going to appointments and taking medication. So we want to share some information so that, there's a lot of buildup to the surgery. And then once they're through the surgery, you kind of adjust to everything afterwards. So we want to be able to provide some information about that as well. I talked about this resource, which is on Kidney Health for All. But there are some other resources that we created that came out of the Health Equity Coalition as well. And some of these resources that I have mentioned here did come out of the Health Equity Coalition. And these in particular are on home dialysis. So we have on the left the home dialysis decision aid. This outlines all the different options when it comes to home dialysis. And what I think is really different about this is there are some thought-provoking questions throughout this resource that allow you to process and think through which modality is best for you, and to think through questions that you might want to ask your healthcare provider when you're in next to, to work with them to figure out what's best for you. There's also the comparison chart. So this outlines the different factors you may consider, that relate to your lifestyle when thinking about the different dialysis modalities. And then finally, a myths versus facts around home dialysis. So debunking some of those home dialysis myths. And I will say, I will encourage you, please go and check out Kidney Health for All. There are a variety of other resources on there. There's information about the Know Your Kidneys campaign and a tool that helps you evaluate your risk for kidneys. There's information on APOL1-mediated kidney disease, as well as a clinical trials finder. So I do suggest to check it out, because these aren't all the resources. So now I will pause for questions, see if we have any.
Hi, this is Francis. I just did a search on Kidney Health for All, and it did not come up. Isn't that weird?
So if you go to, on Kidney Health for All, if you go to the transplant page, you should be able to scroll down. And the fact that you couldn't find it is something that we will definitely talk to our communications and marketing team about that. But if you scroll down, you should see some transplant resources maybe midway through, and that's where it will be.
It says preparing for transplant. Is that what you're talking about? I'm just trying to keep up with how people find things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So it should be, Amma, do you know the resource, like the heading of that? If you go to the transplant section and then scroll down, there should be a couple of resources, and your guide to kidney transplant should be right there. And if not, Amma, I'm sure she will put a link in the chat if she hasn't already to directly get there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Francis.
Okay, so now I got the transplant toolkit. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the toolkit is available in print format, and we will offer to mail you one if you can complete the form that we put in the chat. We will get that to you in hopefully 1 to 2 months. We're doing another mailing right now, so yes.
And I'll just chime in real quick and say, if there are ambassadors out there, they're going to have some tabling events or other community-based events. We will just let me know, and I will get at least a couple copies of this mailed out to you. We won't have enough for people who are used to getting packages and stuff from me. We won't have enough to send you like 50 of these, but we will have enough so that you can just have some on the table, and then you can direct people to the e-version of the toolkit.
Absolutely. And Carmel, I see your suggestion, and we have heard the same thing. So we will definitely, discuss this and take that into consideration too. Other questions? Did I miss any in the chat?
Hey there. Yeah, I got more of a comment. I guess I got a question in there too, but I really
Sure.
appreciate that you put the area in there that talked about separating the facts from the myths. I hear so many stories out there where, they pretty much have to be educated. And I think this is a good method on educating people like, hey, it is a treatment. Same like dialysis is a treatment, kidney transplant is a treatment. Hopefully it goes a really long treatment, but in fact, it still is a treatment. Do you talk much about in the kit regarding post-transplant? I know post-transplant is a a story in itself, like what to expect on post-transplant and the adjustment of medications, and doing pretty much the opposite when it comes to on dialysis in terms of fluid intake.
Okay, so I'm going to say absolutely, but that's not the correct answer to your question. We
Yeah.
don't have any in the existing resource yet, but we are about to start all of the research that we need to do to create the post-transplant part. So we have every intention of building that out in the next year. We understand that there is a lot of changes that you go through when you have to adjust the new medications, when you have to go back for all of these different tests. What are these tests? What are the results mean? All of that. And it continues for a while that you need to go back for lab. So we want to break this down into, what's the 3 months after transplant? What's the 6 months? What's the year? So there is more clarity there, because you're right. It is an important piece that we think there needs to be more information about right now. So thank you for bringing that up.
Sure. Thank you.
Cecily, I see your hand raised.
Hi, thank you. I saw when you had up the slides with respect to preparing financially and legally for transplant, and I guess I didn't get a real sense of how in depth that goes, but and I don't know if it's too late to explore this further, to look into providing a greater resource, but it seems like as far as financial is concerned, I know at my clinic, they had quote unquote a financial person that was part of the team along with the dietitian and pharmacist and so on. But rarely was there a straight answer. It was always in general terms with respect to, oh, be in touch with your insurance or ask your pharmacy, or like I didn't know there were coupons for manufacturers for different medications, or when does Medicaid kick in? Like there was one resource I got from NKF that talked about when you would be able to apply for Medicare 3 years before your transplant, or it would only be good 3 years after, so on and so forth. My point being that I'm having to piecemeal it together and try and get my own understanding without there being a dedicated individual that can let me know when does Medicare kick in connection with your disability, or I'm sorry, like SSDI or whatever, different things. There's no one resource. And I guess to the extent that this guide and toolkit could incorporate, okay, here are the 3 or 4 main places you need to reach out to or investigate. But that to me, it always seemed like the financial part was happening to me. Like the fact that I'm under my husband's insurance is great. I know I have a threshold of, I think last year it was like $11,500 that we needed to cover before they would start just covering everything. That kicks in again at the beginning of the year, but that's all I know. Like the fact that I have a Medicare portion that's being handled right now, I was just automatically enrolled, and I have no idea why or how that is. And it's frustrating because I literally just gave up and I let it happen to me now. And I don't want to be that patient.
Mm-hmm. And you aren't alone either. That is one topic that we hear about time and time again, is there needs to be more clarity on finances and insurances. And it is such a, there are so many details. Now, in the current resource we have right now, where you'll find information on finances is in our eligibility criteria. So when we talk through what, the lead up process. However, we have kind of bookmarked, I talked about post-transplant living being the next component. We have bookmarked as a different topic, finances and insurance, and we have our patient support team who provides financial assistance right now. We will be working alongside them to create a resource that does provide more clarity, because as you go through transplant, you already have enough on your mind as you're thinking about what's next. So you don't want to have to search around for all of these answers. So we do want to provide more transparency here, and that is on the docket for us. We do want to create that. So stay tuned, and we hope we can share more of those resources in the near future so that we can provide more information.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Madeline? Sorry, Mel, were
yes,
you going to
hi.
say something?
I was curious if the toolkit has a section about mental health for both pediatric transplant recipients and for adults, because going forward, there's a lot of people that think that life is just going to be so great and you'll be back up on your feet and all this, and it's very different for each patient, and especially for children that are still like developing and growing up with this. And if they get a transplant very early, the importance of being already in mental health or definitely getting mental health help, because transplant is hard. So I was just curious if that's in there, or if it's not, if it can be, because it really needs to be advocated more.
Yeah, so we will have a portion of our post-transplant resource that is dedicated to mental health. So some of the mental health challenges that may come, but also mental health resources. So we have already kind of outlined some of these topics, and mental health has been one as we talk to patients and healthcare providers before we built this out. But also we've had other conversations, and it's apparent that mental health, it does take a toll on your mental health as you go through this process and after this process. You're not the same self as you were, beforehand, and recovery is hard after a major surgery. But I appreciate the pediatric component, especially calling that out. That is something that we will definitely take into consideration as we develop this, because that is something that wasn't brought to my attention before. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? If no further questions, I'll thank Lauren and Amma for joining us today and helping out. And like I said, for tabling events and stuff like that, we are more than happy to provide some of these to serve as examples. And if you fill out the form from the link in the chat, then you can get one of these mailed to you. And I will interject real quick to say that the U.S. did win the gold for the team all around. So that means Suni Lee, who is working with AKF, will be getting another gold medal, which is great. And I don't know how much you all know about where our office is, but Dominique Dawes, who won gold gymnastics a couple Olympics ago, her gym that she has is like right behind AKF's offices.
No,
so
no
if you're a gymnast who's won gold for the US, chances are you're either right next to us or you're working with us now. So congrats to Suni. And I'll open the floor now to any questions you all have about anything. I'll say.
Good evening.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, who
I'm
was going to talk?
on the phone, not on Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And so I can't get the form in the chat because I'm at a doctor's appointment. So I'm trying to figure out how can I get the form.
I will send it to you. Can you tell me your name?
The last name is Altman, Aultman.
And what's the first name?
Wanda. W,
okay,
like in wonderful, A-N-D-A, Wanda.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make sure you get one of those. We'll input your info into the link for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
And just wanted to make a plug. I will be in Louisville, Kentucky on Saturday, having one of our kidney education days there. So if anyone has any connections in Louisville besides Alex Barrios or Leanne Saylor, because obviously working with them on this, feel free to invite them to our event. And I believe that we will have one in Columbia, South Carolina this fall, and I believe that will be our last kidney education day. Oh, Emily Cross, that's great. will you message? You can just privately message me your email, and I'll send you the flyer for the event, and then you're welcome to invite anybody you like. It'll be from 11:30 to 1:30, and we are providing lunch. So if you can stomach me for 2 hours, you'll be more than welcome to attend, and it'd be great to meet you. I'm gonna, so also, since Emily chimed in, reminded me, for the first time in a while, I see a lot of names here that I have not seen before. Um, so if you're new to these briefings at the very least, you can just send me a private message. Let me know, how did you find out about this? Because we send an email about this, at least one, um, to everyone who's signed up as an ambassador in our database, but then we also post about it in the Facebook group, and not everyone in the Facebook group is an ambassador, and then friends post it on their own social media as well. So I'm always curious as to what made new folks join. So I'm not going to put you all on the spot, um, make you say it publicly, but if you don't mind, I'm always curious. If you want to message me, you can email me. And so for everyone else also, the offer is always there. If you want to discuss how to get more involved with AKF and be more active in our advocacy work, I'd be glad to speak with anybody who's interested, and we can find different things that we can work together on. I plugged it last month, but I'll plug it again this time. Um, it's a little bit dependent upon where you live, but since we last met, there has been a change on the Democratic side of the for the presidential election, and I think that will make both campaigns be a lot more active in more states now. So my plug is, keep an eye out for political activity in your area. Once again, we do not tell you who to vote for or care who you vote for. We work with people from both parties very happily. But if there are going to be folks in your area, it's always great to have people attend community events, parades, whatever people are going to be at, and mention kidney issues, and that you would like to work with them on kidney stuff. We don't expect you to have a full-blown conversation or to get anyone to sign on to any legislation or anything because you spoke to them at a parade, but we just view that as the beginning of the relationship. You can just get that person's info and let them know that we'll send some more stuff along their way. Um, Unfortunately, Maryland, I don't know if it's ever been an interesting state for elections. Uh, maybe I'm just being greedy because we're right next to DC, so we can be plenty involved legislatively. But for folks in the districts, obviously Pennsylvania will be in play. We have Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan will have some activity. Also, it obviously depends who Kamala Harris chooses to be her VP candidate. I read today there's some talk that both campaigns might think that Georgia is in play, so that might bring more political activity to Georgia. Arizona and Nevada are, well, I should say, I don't know how many of these are in play, but I know that they're important for both parties. So Arizona and Nevada are also going to get a lot of political attention. The North Carolina governor withdrew his name from consideration to be the VP. So without him being the vice president, North Carolina is not looked upon as a swing state. It looks like it'll be solidly, excuse me, solidly Republican in this election. So it's not expected to have much political activity there. And then we will also reach out to everyone after the election, because while it's a great opportunity, it is also a very big lift working with the new elected officials and getting them to, quite honestly, know that kidney disease just exists, and that it exists in their community, and what it means and everything. Some people, they do have a connection, and that makes it easier, but a lot of people don't. and I'm again mentioned before, but one problem we have is it takes a while for new members to get their offices staffed up. If you're a representative and then you become a senator, it's much easier to make those connections because usually they just take their entire staff and move over. Or if other people are going to they're going to hire more people, they still take their staff and just fill those into other positions. But it's like if a local doctor becomes a representative and they don't have a paper trail on their issues or any connection to kidney disease, we'd be more than happy to work with them and speak with them. But it's just finding a way to do it. And if I was just elected to Congress, I think I would probably be drowning in paperwork and lots of other things as well. So the first day after the election is also not the best time to reach out. That's when Maureen, our wonderful intern, but she won't be an intern in the fall, but maybe we'll call upon her services, and whoever the fall intern will be, we'll be doing a lot of research to see if these new members have any connection to kidney disease whatsoever. And that's why we do these in district meetings, because that's when we find out if someone's parent was a transplant nurse. Actually is Mark Meadows, who was President Trump's chief of staff. I think he was the last one. When he was just a House member from, I believe it was Western North Carolina, we had a meeting that was just supposed to be with staff on Capitol Hill, and he came by and he talked to us quickly, and he said that his mother was a transplant nurse in North Carolina, and that he was well versed on kidney issues, and we wouldn't have known that if we didn't have that meeting with staff that he happened to stumble upon. So it was pure luck, but I would say we get lucky quite a few times just from doing all these meetings. So we're more than happy to do it. And then if you do have a new member, I can guarantee you 100% you will be hearing from me, because we will need constituents to be in contact with their elected officials, especially the new ones. Because elected officials want to hear from their constituents. Maybe not on every issue. They might have ironclad beliefs on some issues, but in general, when it comes to kidney disease, members are very open and willing to hear from us. They just have to hear from us. They might not become an ardent supporter the first time they hear from us, but it's the work we do and try and develop them into kidney champions for us. So long story short, elections coming up before we know it, and we will certainly be very active towards the end of this year and beginning of next year as well. So any questions about anything at all? Going once, going twice.
Hey, one thing, I guess it's on